is the message of the Son of God, who gave his life that the world might be saved. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? He hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth.
And for 2,000 years the cross has been a symbol of human brotherhood. But fascism created a new symbol, a crooked cross, and with it the doctrine of the master race. What is this doctrine? That one people, the master race, is entitled to as much living space as it desires. All other human beings are of inferior race. They must slave for the master race, or be exterminated if this should be convenient to the masters. In the Far East, too, this teaching has its counterpart. Every Japanese child is taught that the emperor is a god, and that the Japanese are themselves divine, being descended from the gods. One thing is certain. When a people has learnt to believe that it's better than all others and owes others no consideration, then it soon sinks lower than human in its callousness and cruelty.
Now wait, just a minute. Now take me. I'm just a plain and simple citizen of Europe. I can see that this race theory has caused misery and suffering. But you really mean that there's nothing in it? It's all just a lot of bunk? But there's nothing in all this stuff, for example?
Nothing whatever. These German experts have written a good many books and pamphlets to prove their so-called race theory, but it has no scientific basis. According to many of them, human races are supposed to consist of individuals who all look and behave more or less alike, and have children like themselves. But such groups just don't exist among human beings. Distinct races with habits and appearances exactly alike only exist among certain domesticated plants and animals. These white leghorns, for example, are the results of generations of selective inbreeding. Their chicks will grow up to look just like the parents. More, they'll behave like the parents, and will, most of them, be good layers. These puppies will be Scottish collies like their mother. And these greyhounds will one day have the build for speed. They'll grow up to pursue the hare exactly as their parents did. You could never get a collie to run down a hare by sight. Nor could you teach a greyhound to pen sheep. This book just assumes, in face of scientific fact, that human beings are comparable to dogs and chickens. British race, a French race, an Italian race, all different and with quite distinct inborn qualities. The idea wasn't invented by Hitler. Muddle-headed people have had it for hundreds of years. This is how a 16th century author wrote about the peoples of Europe.
The Welsh are dishonest. The Irish are covered with lice. The English are gluttons. But the Scots are of dispositions fitted for society, of behavior and gestures of the body excelling other nations.
Who wrote all this? Yes, you're right. He was a Scotsman. Let's look at the history of the British Isles. Every other people in Europe has a similar mixed origin. And what you're watching here covers only the period of written history. tens of thousands of years before that, we know that there were successive waves of different peoples, all of them mixed too, black-haired, fair-haired, from south and north and east. And now the descendants of this hodgepodge make up the folk who live in unity and friendship in the Britain we know today. Each of the groups of peoples Hitler wrote of so glibly as races has developed distinct features of culture, language, literature, traditions, patriotism. That is, they've become nations. But none have a single racial origin or anything like it. The result of this mixed ancestry is that in Europe today there are no peoples whose individuals are even nearly alike and different from those of any other peoples. Look here, for example. On the left, the sample group of Spaniards. On the right, one of Swedes. The Spaniards are shorter and darker. The Swedes taller and fairer, on an average. But look closer. You can easily find a small Swede and a dark Swede, a tall Spaniard and a fair Spaniard. What about trying to recognize some of the so-called races of Europe? Do you think you can? Try to guess them before we name them. Ready? Danish, British, German, Norwegian, Dutch. With no catch, try these. Ready? French, Finnish, Belgian, Polish, Italian, Austrian. Here's Rembrandt's picture, A Jewish Bride. Probably it's this dark type most people think of when they talk of a typical Jew. Yet as many as 40% of Jews in Alsace and in parts of Poland were fair, and plenty are red-haired and blue-eyed. The Germans are better than anyone else, the Nazis used to say. Like young gods, fair-haired, blue-eyed and tall. But does this go for all Germans? What about this one? Or this? And look at his beautiful, frank blue eyes. The truth is that the Germans are one of the most mixed of all people. Physically, the average of the Germans in the south is pretty like that of most Austrians, but also of a lot of Swiss. The average in some parts of the north is more like that in Scandinavia, and in the east, it's very mixed indeed. Mixed with Slav and even a little Mongol. German race experts would hardly like a real race frontier, would they? You've heard fascists talk about Aryans as though these were a definite fair-haired white race with its home up here. Actually, there is no Aryan race. Aryan is the name of a group of languages, originating over here, probably, and used from early times by a mixed group of European and Asiatic peoples. The words on this chart are Aryan words. In each of these related languages, you see the same meaning expressed by a similar word. 3, for instance. Even the famous so-called Jewish nose is not Jewish in origin. It first appears in history in these wall carvings of the Hittites, who spoke an Aryan, not a Semitic language. They probably became mixed into some, but by no means all, Jewish communities, as well as several other peoples, by cross-breeding. It's true that there are some groups of peoples, the European and the Negro, for example, or the Chinese and the European, whose physical appearance is so different that we will almost always be able to pick them out. So the physical differences between typical examples of the European, Chinese and Negro peoples you might correctly call racial. But instead of picking out extremes, take a walk eastward from Europe into Africa and look at the people of every village that you pass. You find they show a gradual changeover in almost every character. You would see a similar change towards the Chinese type if you walked eastward.
Yes, all right. I can understand that. Science says that today there are scarcely any pure races. Certainly none in Europe. But all peoples are mixed and a bit related. But how about the general average of each? Is one mixed people better in general than another, just as Hitler says one race is better than another?
Hitler's idea, set out in that book you're holding, is an absurdity. Here's the type of thing he said.
It is the Aryan who has furnished the great building stones and planes for the edifices of all human progress.
That won't wash, you know. If Hitler had done without all non-Aryan discoveries, he couldn't have had this page number. The zero was invented by the Arabs. Nor the letterpress of his book. Ink was invented in China. Nor even the actual pages it's printed on. Paper was first invented either by the Egyptians or the Chinese. So you see, all this Aryan nonsense and race superiority business of Hitler's just isn't true. If you examine differences between people carefully, you'll find that they don't necessarily mean that either is superior. Look at this creature. She's a mosquito, carries yellow fever in the tropics, kills all white men pretty quickly. But these dark men belong in the tropics. They don't die of yellow fever, or if they do, it's only rarely. In these regions, they're physically superior. But take one of them to a temperate climate, and he gets TB more easily than a European. Is he physically inferior or physically superior? Depends entirely on where he happens to be living. What is it that the English pride themselves on as one of their most typical characteristics? Love of sport. Here is Lord's, headquarters of cricket, the most English game of all. Who are these men in flannel? West Indians, of African descent. They are keener and better cricketers than any except a few teams of European origin. Certainly better than any team of Scotsmen or Dutchmen, for example, who are much closer to the English than they are. Some different peoples have long been considered primitive, and therefore incapable of rising to the opportunities they might be given. For example, until this war, in the United States Navy, Negroes were only allowed to serve as messmen. But there came a day, in December 1941, America's first hero of the war, the hero of Pearl Harbor, was Dory Miller, a Negro mess boy. He blew a hole right through that regulation when he seized a machine gun and blew the Japs out of the sky. Here, on the Chukchi Peninsula, within a few miles of the Arctic Circle, dwell a people whose culture, until less than 20 years ago, had not emerged from the Stone Age. Today, the Chukchi produce engineers, aviators. The Chukchi lieutenant was decorated for leading a parachute descent during the liberation of Kiev. This man, from the heart of France, the Auvergne, Laval, the traitor who joined the enemies of his country. For this, Governor Eboué, who, when France surrendered, brought his huge African colony to the side of those who fought on. Which was the better Frenchman in France's hour of need? There are two directly opposite conceptions. The path of prejudice, the fascist, that holds that any and every member of the so-called master race is superior in all circumstances. To a Sun Yat-sen or to an Einstein. And there is the democratic way, which is also the Christian, which holds that human beings are noble, not by their so-called blood or descent, but by what they do. and holds that to all, however slowly, however gradually, but surely, must be extended wider and wider opportunity. Who knows how these children will grow up? Who knows how each of the many peoples of the earth, when it has its full chance and opportunity, will contribute to the welfare of all? This war has taught us one great lesson. Those nations whose people stand together like brothers cannot be conquered. The list of Red Army fighters decorated for heroism includes the names of more than 80 different peoples and nationalities. Who may you, lad, be then? Tell us, Sergeant.
Well, Bud, these fellows here and myself are all citizens of the United States. Would you like to meet them? Attention, men. Tell this fellow your name.
Capo, Smith, Brown, Jones, Bronte, Pikoski,
Polo,
Lafitte,
O'Brien,
Van Hofen,
Crowell,
Cole,
Martinelli,
Delouet,
Lopez. Right? Hey! Forward. Hi!
Hey, Sergeant, where are you off to?
Forward, brother. The whole bunch of us together. That's the way everyone can go. You too, if you want to.